So we have been looking at the times of the Gentiles. Does everyone remember that? The times of the
Yes.
Gentiles, and that's a protracted time in the time of the end. And so we've been delving into some of the end time prophecies to try and lift those prophecies out and put them in their proper place. And this is a little tricky. And this is what the challenge is within the biblical movement, if you will, whether it's Judaism, Christianity, or Messianic believers. The challenge that they're all facing is which prophecies pertain to what time. And this is what we've been looking at. The idea that Peter talks about in 1 Peter, where the prophets search diligently. And what they were looking for, according to Peter, was the time frame of the events that they were studying, when they were going to happen, and what the world events would be like, and what was going to be going on. So these are the things that we've been looking at. And we kind of jumped into it last week again. And I want to look at, explore a little deeper what's going on in the world today, and then we're going to jump back into some prophecy and see how it all fits. And we looked briefly at it, but then I was starting to do a little more homework, and I thought, you know what, I need to share this stuff because this is really vitally important, because Yeshua, according to the time of the end, what he was saying, he was listing a bunch of world events that would be happening, and that's, he said at the end of that in Matthew 24, I believe it's 33 to 35, somewhere in there. He said, when you see these things, know that the end is near. So what are we looking? We're looking at world events that are going to be happening that will be indicators, they will be signs, if you will, of his near approaching the second coming of Yeshua. So we want to explore a little deeper as to what's going on in world affairs, and then we're going to jump back into some prophecies. So let's have a word of prayer, and then we'll continue. Father in heaven, we come before you on this Sabbath day. We want to honor you, Father, and we ask that you would honor us with your presence, with your Spirit. Father, we recognize our need, our insufficiency. And first of all, Father, we thank you for the gift of your Son to take our place. And we want to accept that anew again this day on the Sabbath. And we ask, Father, that you would grace us with your Spirit, the Spirit of Yeshua, to give us understanding of these things. We ask this in Yeshua's name. Amen. All right, so let's go to the first slide. And we looked at this slide last week, and I talked a little bit about how Vladimir Putin has allied himself with the Eastern Orthodox Church. Approximately 75% of the Russian people are of this persuasion. That's an estimate, of course, but that's the majority of the people, obviously. So just like in old times when Rome was starting to crumble, we see this across the world, and we're going to be looking at this. As the governments are faltering, they look to religion, and we see this New World system that's looking away from religion, that's trying to take control. But we're seeing a backlash now, and we want to look a little bit about that backlash, because we've been saying that this backlash is going to win out over this lack of religious moving upon the world right now. And we don't need to talk about that. We're all familiar with that. And there's been some recent developments as well with the WHO and some of these things that they're trying to pass right now, and it's really actually scary stuff. Well, the Christian side of things The conservative Christian side of things is rising up against that. They will ultimately take control and get back the reins of government, but where is that all going to end? We're going to look at that today. We want to see where that is going as well. And in the interim, it's going to look good. However, it's going to go the wrong way, and they will go further in their direction, which will become a problem for God's believers. And we're going to open that up as we get back into prophecy. So we're going to look at what's going on in the world. We won't get into this too much, but I came across an article in the Hungarian conservative publication, a recent article published in Northeastern Global News, an online journal of Northeastern University, stated how Christian nationalists in the United States are enamored with Russian President Vladimir Putin, notwithstanding their opposition to the Russian Federation. So the idea is they don't want Russia to take all of Europe, to take more than what they had before. So they're opposed to that. But the Christian nationalists in the United States are very intrigued by what Putin is doing and who Putin is allying himself with, and that being the church. So it goes on to say, in fact, citing the Journal for Scientific Study in Religion, a subsection of America's religious right is flocking to the country's autocratic leader in large numbers, as explained by Sarah Riccardi-Swartz, Assistant Professor of Religion and Anthropology at Northeastern University. So this is an article speaking of how the American right, the conservative right, is actually taking a stand with Putin, which is pretty strange for the American people, but they see an ally actually in Putin, not in that he's, not that Putin is a great guy by any stretch of the imagination, but he's allied himself with the church. And what does that mean? Well, that's pretty significant when it comes to Christianity, which believes that they need to take the gospel to all the world. So they're seeing a better alliance. The Christian right in the United States is seeing a closer alliance, if you will, than that of this movement, this world movement, to have a one world system, one world government. And so they see that would be the lesser of two evils. And this is interesting because prophecy indicates that this is the direction we're going to go. Even if Christian nationalists are ambivalent to Russia as the geopolitical construct, or if they view it as a threat, they are still favorable towards Putin as a political figure, even if the actions of the state are somehow violent and perpetrating violence towards another country. The man himself seems to exemplify what Christian nationalists desire, which is arguably a white ethno-state. Now we're going to look at this white ethno-state. That's kind of a new term for a lot of people, and we want to look at that here in a few minutes, exactly what this is saying. This is an article that paints this as kind of evil, and it's in opposition to a degree just by the name white ethno-state, which is not true. It's absolutely not true what they're trying to do. This is the same kind of paintbrush that they're painting the likes of Donald Trump and those around him as what they want to make a white ethno-state. So we want to understand what that means so that when we hear that in the news, these concepts, we're going to know that what they're saying is an actual lie, but they're making it look very evil by the terms that they're using, and the people that know what these terms mean, those are little signals that are going out. So move on here. Christian nationalism is a type of religious nationalism in which the end goal is to achieve an absolute Christian theocracy within a society. So what they're saying is they want to return. These people on the left are painting a picture that the religious side, the conservative side, they want to reinstitute, if you will, a Old Testament theocracy type system, but instead of Israel being in control, the Christians will be in control. And what that actually means is, and we're going to see this as we go, is they will make laws. This is what they're projecting, is that they will make laws that will become illegal to do certain things. You will have to do certain things. And of course, this is actually what the Bible is telling us as well. But I don't believe some of these people on the left that are looking at this, they just see the whole concept of Christianity and people being forced to believe certain things is evil in and of itself. Goes on to say its advocates primarily focus on the internal politics of society, such as legislating civil and criminal laws that reflect their view of Christianity and the role of religion in political and social life, which calls for, at least in their mindset, a strong man like Putin. So Putin can enforce, he's showing that he will enforce what he believes, and they believe because he's allied himself with the church, and the church has already said that this war in Ukraine is a just war, and it's totally, Putin is totally doing the right thing in what he's doing. Why would they say that? Well, the reason is because these people on the conservative side are looking at who Putin is fighting. He's fighting this New World push, this New World Order system push that is totally anti-religious and completely secular and looking to be gods, if you could say that, gods in and of themselves, and basically it's primarily just an evolutionary type of government. And they're going to do exactly what they want to do and leave God completely out of the picture. So that's why the church in Russia is saying that this is actually a just war, and Putin is doing the same thing because he's fighting back the godless from the West. And they are including Biden in this, President Biden of the United States, because he is of that group of people. And the people in the United States that are on the right, the conservatives, are seeing this. They recognize this New World push is evil, without question. And so now they're starting to more gravitate to what Putin is actually trying to do. So it's confusing in a lot of people's minds, but this is something that I've been saying for some time now, is that Putin, I'm not sure who the bad guy is or who the lesser of two evils is here. And as we look at it, we can see that many others are looking at this as well. So this is again from the Hungarian Conservative. And I use this one because as you will see, in Hungary, there's also a push for this as well. The Putin hoopla. In 2014, Putin made the cover of the evangelical magazine Decision in a piece in which Graham's son, Franklin, lauded his handling of the Winter Olympics and his protection of Christians. Franklin visited Russia in 2015 and ever since has promoted Putin as a godly leader. Imagine that. A few days before the invasion of Ukraine, he asked people to pray for Putin, but not for the Ukrainians, creating a decent amount of backlash. And of course, this would be very confusing to most people. Part of Putin hoopla is partly due, as per a December 2022 article by the Wall Street Journal titled Putin's New Strategy, laying claim to traditional values, to the former KGB colonel, presenting himself as a defender of traditional family values and a savior of the human race. Here we go. So this is what the conservative people in the United States are starting to wake up to is who better to ally yourself with this New World push that's going ahead right now, that are actually devising a lot of schemes against the common person, or do we go with someone like this that has allied more himself with traditional values? And this is very clear as we start looking at this. They like the fact that he signed into law a bill that expands Russia's restriction on the promotion of LGBT propaganda. Any action or the spreading of any information that is considered an attempt to promote homosexuality in public, online, or in films, books, or advertising could incur a heavy fine. So we're starting to see, okay, this is why Christians are starting to see that this guy, he may be a better option than this New World push. And a lot of people, even in government in the United States, are starting to see that, hey, well, who is the bad guy here? Objectively speaking, these are issues that an ethically inclined person would applaud. In fact, it seems as if Putin took a page right out of Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban's playbook. So, if you know anything about him, he's of the same mind. He's more of a conservative, a populist, if you will. And he's praised Donald Trump in the past, still does today. And so all these people are kind of this backlash against this New World system that we're seeing pushed forward today. And it goes that of safeguarding both the institution of the family and the innocent children against activists who seek to enforce policies that go against natural law as human rights. So natural law, we know about natural law. We saw this in Paul when he's talked about this natural law. The woman goes against nature, man goes against nature, and do those things that are contrary to nature. This is what this is referring to, what Paul spoke about in Romans chapter 1. And so we see this, and because Christians are supposed to unite, they see this push in Russia that he's going this direction. So we're seeing this shift in thinking, albeit it's kind of strange for those in the West to see Putin as the good guy, but it's because of this ally that Putin has with the church, and that's where the common ground is. The significance of Patriarch Kirill of Russia to the Hungarian Orthodox community. So this is the leader of the Orthodox Church in Moscow, and this is one of the allies, closest allies that Putin has. Goes on to say, we have entered into a struggle that is not a physical but a metaphysical significance. Today there is a test for the loyalty to this new world order, a kind of pass to that happy world, the world of excess consumption and the world of false freedom. Yeah, this freedom. And that's what Satan's been trying to pass on. We need freedom. We need to give the people freedom. And it's just a false sense of freedom. Goes on to say, do you know what this test is? This is this patriarch now. The test is very simple and at the same time terrible. It is the gay pride parade. The demands on many to hold a gay parade are a test of their loyalty to the New World Order. And we know that if people or countries reject these demands, then they do not enter into that world order. They become strangers to it. And I believe that's why the West has jumped into this thing and started legislating all of these things that they're legislating, because if they're going to be part of the New World Order, then they have to give way to all this free thinking. And this is exactly what is going on. This really telling it the way it is. Answering the call of the representatives of the Orthodox community, Hungary recognized that the Russian Orthodox Church has some 100 million members worldwide, and the sanctioning of its leaders would isolate religious people from their spiritual leader. The patriarch is regularly prayed for and commemorated during church services in Hungary too, as it is at his home to the Hungarian Orthodox community under the Moscow Patriarchate. So that's out of the Hungarian conservatives. So we see this growing movement within conservative Christianity that is making connections around the world, and they're forming alliances with each other. This is another, the president of El Salvador. I was looking at some things, and if you get an opportunity, we watched a presentation by Tucker Carlson, an interview that they had. Very, very interesting. You may want to take note of that. But you can see here, Tucker Carlson deems himself as a Christian. He is very opposed to what's going on in the world right now, very opposed to this New World push, and he speaks openly about the evil, and he's interviewed a number of people that are involved in this on the conservative side, and this movement here is growing here in North America as well. This El Salvador, the president of El Salvador, has basically gone to war against evil in his country and has turned it around completely. I want to look at a couple things that are kind of interesting about this fella. His paternal grandparents were Christian Palestinians from Jerusalem and Bethlehem. His maternal grandparents were also Christians. She is a Catholic and he Greek Orthodox. You see any connections here? His father later converted to Islam and became an imam. And his wife has Jewish roots. Here he's seen at the wall, the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. His dad was an imam, his wife was Jewish roots, and this is the new leader of El Salvador. And his grandfather was a Christian Palestinian from Jerusalem, which didn't stop President-elect visiting in 2018, and this week we're calling his stop at the Western Wall. So here we have this system that's developing, and we have what we've been looking at in prophecy, is that this attempt at this New World system, this push that's going forward, we've been saying this is going to come to an end, and what's happening is Christians worldwide are starting to see the evil behind it, and they're pushing back. And so in a sense, it's a counterfeit New World Order. Satan has set up the bad guy, if you will, to raise up what appears to be the white hat, the good guy, and then he's going to have his way with them. And all the while, the other interesting part is it's going to cause people to go back to the Word of God. And so our role in this is this is going to create a huge opportunity for us to talk about the Bible, because there's going to be a push for Christianity and good values worldwide, and it'll be our opportunity to, as what Yeshua said, to preach the gospel to every creature. And this is what we need to do as we see this developing. It's going to create tremendous opportunities as these discussions are going to come to the front. So we want to look at this white ethno-state and understand this terminology. Christian nationalism, and if you watch CNN or NBC, you'll hear this Christian nationalism as some great evil, and in the right sense, it is a great evil. However, I don't believe that's what's going on at all. They're just painting this with this brush so that people that don't quite understand, the people that don't check things out, will just accept what they're saying and run with it. So it goes on to explain that other areas have been looked at into as sites for the potential white ethno-state by certain groups, mostly notable. The South has been proposed, so the South as in the United States, as a white ethno-state by self-proclaimed Southern nationalists. So there are these people that exist, and the League of the South, due to the region's history and secessionism, and due to the fact that the region was once an independent nation, which was known as the Confederate States of America. So they're painting these people as in comparison with the pre-Civil War. Another white ethno-state has been proposed by Billy Roper's Shield Wall Network, a neo-Nazi organization which is based in Mountain View, Arkansas. It seeks to establish a white ethno-state in the Ozark region, and it is affiliated with other separatist groups such as the Ku Klux Klan, the Knights Party located near Harrison, Arkansas, the League of the South, and Nationalist Socialist Movement, a member of the now defunct Nationalist Front. All this stuff sounds pretty bad, especially when you throw the KKK in there. It's just evil. So these people, the CNNs of the world, if you will, they're painting this brush across this whole movement in the United States, including President Donald Trump. And so this is how they're attacking him, and really quite interesting. Conversely, the Ozarks have been a hotbed for adherents of the Christian identity movement, including the Church of Israel and various members of the Christian Patriot movement who have set up paramilitary training camps in order to prepare for the coming Armageddon. You don't want to miss that point. This Church of Israel, I had to do some homework to find out who they were. They actually keep the Sabbath and they keep the feasts from my research. And so, and I know this of the Ozarks because they're full of people from the Messianic movement. They are moving down there. And so I wonder if we could ever see a Waco situation on this type of situation. I think it's very possible. Okay, the defunct neo-Nazi organization Traditionalist Worker Party, led by Matthew Heimbach, also sought to establish a white ethno-state which is named Avalon, based on the ideological principles of Nazism, various strands of European fascism, such as legionnarism, British fascism, and Eastern Orthodoxy. So you see how they're throwing everything into the same mix, and it's creating a lot of fear for people on the left, especially people on the left that have given up their Christianity and more are inclined to believe in evolution and these types of things. Their fear is that the Christians are going to gain control, not out of fear of what the Bible says, from what I could gather, but more like the fear of what it would be like with Christians telling us what to do. They're not going to have that. They're not going to have this man rule over them. So here we're going to jump back into our study here. We're looking at the times of the Gentiles. We're looking at Luke was our launching pad because he's the one that talks about the time of the Gentiles, that Jerusalem would be under control of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles would be fulfilled. And that's been confusing. We've been looking at that. What is the time of the Gentiles? Is it just a vast amount of time where Jerusalem was cast out of the promised land from the time of 70 AD until now, where now they've been gone back in, and was that the time of the Gentiles, and now the Jews have control? There's a lot of confusion on that. And the Bible's quite clear on what the times of the Gentiles. It's a calculated time that God is allowing the Gentiles to be in control of Jerusalem, and the prophecies tell us what that is. So Mark 13 and Matthew 24 speak of the times of the Gentiles. The times of the Gentiles, quite simply, is the question that Yeshua was asked, what is the sign of your coming and the end of the age? And then he tells them all the events. All those events fit into the times of the Gentiles. And we've been looking at different interpretations, how the Bible's been interpreted by whether you're a preterist, historicist, or a futurist, and how they've thrown some of these prophecies out depending on what persuasion you are. We want to look at Daniel again today because it speaks of the times of the Gentiles, and we're going to jump into Isaiah because this, as we're winding up in the times of the Gentiles, we're going to finish up with some verses in Isaiah that are not looked at that much, but have everything to do with where we're headed here in the future. And then Revelation, of course, we can't get out of looking at that one. So here again, the preterist view, the historicist view, and futurist view, they would look at all these prophecies completely different from each other, and depending on the degree of preterist that you are, if you think all the prophecies are in the past, or you think some of them are in the past, like that would be more of a historicist view, that some of it's in the past and still there's a little bit yet in the future. Or a futurist view views some of these prophecies as completely in the future. Doesn't mean all prophecies in the future, but they've taken segments out of the prophets and said, no, these things were not fulfilled in the past. They had application in the past. Those that have gone before us have tried to figure out what they meant, and they did the best they could with what they had at the time. But we were told that these prophecies would not be understood until the time of the end. They're very clear Bible referencing that, which we're going to get to as well today. So we're going to jump into this, go a little deeper into the times of the Gentiles, and see how these things are actually happening now. And so as the futurist, he's not looking way into the future. And that's significant too, because the reality is God's going to give the understanding of these visions when they are needed. And that, I would say, is now. And so that's what we're looking at. We're not putting these prophecies way into the future. We're saying that God is revealing them now because we need the information now, because we have arrived at the time of the end. And that's what Yeshua said. He said, when you see these things, know that the end is near. And that's why he gave them, so that we could know that the end is near. So we were jumping back now into Daniel. We left off here. We were looking at these texts. What we've been looking at is the little horn, and see how the little horn is seen in Daniel chapter 7, Daniel chapter 8, and then when we jump into Daniel chapter 11, we've been looking at where we see this little horn. However, the problem with Daniel 11, it's literal. So we don't see these symbols in Daniel 11 like we see them in Daniel 7 and Daniel 8. So we've got to take Daniel 7 and Daniel 8 and see if we can find the symbols in Daniel chapter 11. So that's what we've been looking at here. So we're jumping in part way. So if you've just started looking at this presentation, you want to definitely go back into the previous presentation, because we started near the beginning of Daniel 11, which is actually Daniel 10. Daniel 10 is the opening chapter to the vision of Daniel 11, and partially through Daniel 12. And we're going to see that. The vision actually begins at the first part of Daniel 11 and ends a couple verses, 2-3 verses into Daniel chapter 12. And then in Daniel chapter 12, we get into the interpretation, not the interpretation per se of the vision, because the vision is literal. So we don't need necessarily the interpretation of the vision. But what it gives us in Daniel chapter 12 is the time frame. And this is the interesting part, because Peter, as I started today, Peter talked about what the prophets were looking for were the events in the prophecies, but they were also looking at the time frame of those events. And this is exactly what we see. We see a vision that opens in Daniel chapter 10. Then the vision proper is given in Daniel 11. And then we see it close up in Daniel chapter 12, 3 verses into it. And then it starts into the interpretation. But it's not the interpretation of the vision, because like I said, the vision is literal, but it's the time frame contained within the vision itself. But it's not only the time frame contained in the vision itself, it also overlaps the time frames that began in Daniel chapter 7 that were given. It was the times and a half. We see this again in Daniel chapter 12. And we see the daily referred to in Daniel chapter 12, which brings in the time frame of Daniel chapter 8, where we see the daily as well that comes into that chapter. And so now we can put all those chapters together, and that is in keeping with what Yeshua told Daniel in Daniel chapter 12, verse 4, that Daniel seal up the vision, and it would not be understood until the time of the end. So these are the things that we're struggling with, trying to understand how they fit as to the time frame. So this is exactly what we're looking at. So we've jumped in here partway through Daniel 11. We covered the verses prior to this that pertain to the little horn and the Jewish people as well. Daniel chapter 11 refers to what the Jewish people are going to do as well. Daniel 11 verse 14 specifically. So it says here, this league that's made with him, and I would propose that the him is the little horn. He will act deceitfully in keeping with exactly what it speaks of in Daniel 7 and Daniel 8, as we're going to see. These terms are exactly the same terms that are used for the little horn in these symbolic prophecies. And bear in mind, this is literal, so it's not, doesn't say little horn, but we can recognize him by the characteristics. He becomes strong with a small number of people. In other words, he doesn't have a large army. This is exactly what we see in Daniel 8 as well with the little horn. Through his cunning, he shall cause deceit to prosper. Under his rule, he shall exalt himself in his heart. He shall destroy many in their prosperity. He shall even rise against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without human means.
Is that Daniel 8?
Yes, this is referring back to Daniel 8. This is just to make this parallel here with this little horn. He shall, this is speaking of the little horn, same thing. And so this is the connections that we're making. Also goes on to say in verse 24 of Daniel 11, he shall enter peaceably even to the richest places of the province. He shall do what his fathers have not done, nor his forefathers. He shall disperse among them the plunder, spoil, and riches, and he shall devise his plans against the strongholds, only for a time. In other words, only for a specific time. He's allotted a specific time in which he will do this, and I believe what it's talking about here, this specific time, is the times of the Gentiles. So there's a calculated time that God is allowing this to happen, and we saw in Daniel chapter 8, when these kings of the earth have come to their ripeness in transgression, it says another king comes along, and it's this king, and we see this partway through Daniel 11 is this other king comes along, and this is exactly what it talks about in Daniel chapter 8. And he's only allowed a certain amount of time. Goes on to say, at the appointed time he shall return and go toward the south, but it shall not be like the former or the latter. For ships from Cyprus shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return in rage against the holy covenant and do damage. So he will return and show regard to those who forsake the holy covenant. We can't miss this point. This is this power. We have a geographical fix here in Cyprus. Cyprus is a country in the Mediterranean, very close, pretty close, just off Turkey and Israel proper, not too far. So we have a geographical fix of where this vision is going to be played out. And this power is going to rage against the Holy Covenant. Well, what's the Holy Covenant? The Holy Covenant is a covenant that God makes with his people, is making with those that accept him today. He's wanting people to embrace the Holy Covenant, but there's going to be a war against the Holy Covenant in the end. And this power, this little horn power, will show regard for those who forsake the Holy Covenant. So our worst enemies are going to be those that leave from amongst us. And that's always been the way it's been. So the ones that turn against those that are accepting the Holy Covenant will become our worst enemies. Daniel chapter 7 speaks of this, doesn't say it the same way, but it means the same thing. He shall he shall speak pompous words against the Most High. He shall persecute the saints of the Most High. He shall intend to change times and laws. Then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and a half a time. This is saying something a little bit different, but when we examine what it's saying exactly the same thing. He's going to war against the Holy Covenant. What is the Holy Covenant? It's an agreement that we make with God that we want to be part of his government and we want to follow his laws. And so we see the details of this in Daniel chapter 11 in the literal discussion of the prophecy. And we get quite a bit more detail here that this power, this little horn power, is going to rage against, in other words, make war with God's people. And that's exactly what we see in the prophecies. And Revelation 13 says exactly the same thing. He makes war against the saints. And we see this going right into the book of Revelation, as we're going to see as well. So now we've got a connecting dot from Daniel chapter 7. And so this time frame that is in Daniel chapter 7, this time, times and a half, we see this come up again in Daniel chapter 11, verse 7, a time, times and a half. And when the power of the holy people will be completely shattered, exactly referencing back to Daniel chapter 7. Goes on in Daniel chapter 11, 31 to 33, and forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress. Then they shall take away the daily sacrifice and place there the abomination of desolation. So here we see more details of what this means. So if they're going to defile the sanctuary fortress, there would have to be a sanctuary fortress there, which there is not today. Sanctuary fortress, I think what it's actually talking about is the temple that's going to be in Jerusalem. In other places we see that as well. Daniel 8 speaks of that. The place of his sanctuary is cast down. And then we see another time frame, and these are all things that the little horn does. In Daniel chapter 8, verses 9 through 14, we see more details of the activities of the little horn. And it's definitely referencing a place in Jerusalem, and it says of the little horn that he will end up in Jerusalem. And this is talking about what he's going to do there, take away the daily sacrifice. So this would mean, and ultimately what this is going to mean is the Jews, the Jewish people, the Israelite people will be allowed to build their temple again. And I believe the Christians and the Jews will be working together for a time, but when it comes to the place where they're sacrificing again, then the Christians ultimately will take that away, and the times of the Gentiles will begin at the time that they take control in Jerusalem and push the Jewish people out again. And this is what Luke talks about, that the Jewish people will be put out of their place again in the time of the end. The ultimate persecution of the Jews has not happened yet. It's going to get a lot worse for the Jewish people according to the prophecies. They are not going to be the ones that are in control. They will be for a time in Jerusalem, but when the Christians make their move on Jerusalem, they will be cast out. Those who do wickedly against the covenant, he shall corrupt with flattery. So when you're corrupting somebody with flattery, you're just using them. So this power, this little horn power, is going to use people to get the things that they want. And they want control of Jerusalem. But the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits. And those of the people who understand shall instruct many. This is when the gospel of the kingdom that Yeshua referred to in Matthew 24, verse 14. This is when the gospel of the kingdom is going to go to all the world, and then the end will come. And Yeshua warned us that we would be brought before magistrates, before synagogues or churches, and we will be asked to give an answer for what we believe and why we believe it, and some will be killed. And this is getting into some of the details on how that all will happen. That's why Yeshua referred us back to Daniel so that we can get the details on what he was talking about. Daniel 11:34-35, now when they fall, they shall be aided with a little help, but many shall join them by intrigue. So people will want to become part of us because they see a great movement of God working among his people. However, they will be joined by intrigue. They will be drawn to it, but their minds will be drawn to it, but their hearts won't submit to the whole process. And this is where the problem's going to be. And we've seen this through the ages. A lot of people will admit mentally to the truth, but their hearts are not changed. And this is the sad part about it. We need to submit to the authority of the word. And some of those of understanding shall fall to refine them, purify them, and make them white until the time of the end. This is the time that Yeshua was speaking of in Matthew 24. This is what he talked about when people would be betrayed by parents, by brothers, by sisters, and associates. This is the details of how that's all going to happen. They're going to be refined, made them white, so persecution has a beneficial effect, if you will, if we can accept that on us. It purifies us, and that's why God allows us to go through it. It's a necessary evil, if you will, that happens to us. It's all for our benefit. And somehow I think that's why Peter said, count it all joy when you're persecuted for his sake, because it has a purifying effect. And it spreads the gospel seed, because when people realize that we're willing to take a stand even unto death, people start to consider there must be something to this that they're talking about. Goes on in Revelation 19, 7-9, which I believe is talking about this time specifically. Let us be glad and rejoice and give him glory, for the marriage of the Lamb has come and his wife has made herself ready. So this purification process is to get us ready for this supper, this marriage of the Lamb. And because we've been made ready, and the persecution is what makes us ready. And to her it was granted to be arrayed in fine linen, clean and bright, for the fine linen is the righteous acts of the saints. So we see this same thing go forward into the book of Revelation, give more details, and as we put all of this together, we get a much clearer picture of what's going to be happening in the time of the end. Revelation goes on to tell us in chapter 19, verse 9, then he said to me, write, blessed are those who are called to the marriage supper of the Lamb. And he said to me, these are the true sayings of God. So blessed are those that are invited to the marriage supper. So there's the marriage supper of the Lamb and those that are invited to the marriage supper. Seems that there's a very good possibility here, as we look closer, that there would be two groups. There would be the bride and those that are invited to the marriage supper of the Lamb. I just want my ticket to that supper. That's what I am seeking. Goes on, Daniel 11:36-37. Then the king shall do according to his will. This is this little horn. We're going back to this little horn king now. Not used as the little horn, but this is literal now. The king shall do according to his own will. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god, shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods. He shall prosper till the wrath has been accomplished, for what has been determined shall be done. So the wrath has been accomplished. This wrath that's going to be accomplished is the same wrath that Yeshua spoke about, same one that's recorded in Luke chapter 21. The times of the Gentiles and the wrath that follows the times of the Gentiles. This is exactly what we're looking at here. We see this word blasphemy used in throughout the book of Daniel and in the book of Revelation, especially in chapter 13. He does blasphemies. This is talking about this same power that takes control in the time of the end and rules over the kings of the earth. He shall neither regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any god. He shall exalt himself above them all. So this is a power that takes full control, ends up sitting in Jerusalem, and I think the part of the most interesting part of this verse 37, it says that he has nor the desire of women. That's kind of a strange thing to say here, but that's an identifying mark of this power. Could this be a representation of those that have accepted the concept of being celibate? I think this does play into it. This concept of celibacy within the Catholic Church has been the source of evil throughout its history. And it wasn't always a celibate church. This happened during the time of the Catholic Church in its dominance back in history, but it's been a source of evil through its history ever since it was brought in as well. Daniel chapter 8, 10, and 11 would drop back here, and it says, "And it, the little horn, grew up to the host of heaven. It cast some of the host and some of the stars to the ground and trampled them." So this parallels what it's talking about in Daniel chapter 11, this exaltation of this power, deeming itself to be higher than any power on the earth, and rising up to the host of heaven, and so to speak, that's symbolic in a way, because what it does is it exalts itself above God because it institutes a system and persecutes those that are under the system of God. So it's exalting himself, as it were, above God himself, making laws, enforcing laws, as we're looking at the setting up of institution of governments in the world, this backlash against this evil that's going on in the world, this counterfeit one world system, if you will, to create a new system of world governance that will be led by Christians around the world, and they will enforce their brand of Christianity on the whole world, and God's people will then be the source, not the source, but the ones that feel the persecution against this power. So as we're seeing things develop, we can see where it's going to go, but it's going to create opportunities for us along the way. But ultimately, this shift, this global shift now in the Christian nationalist movement, and I say Christian nationalists, not ethno-nationalists, it's not ethnicity or whether you're white or not, that has nothing to do with it. It's this is being confused and portrayed as being evil, but it's going to be a Christianity that includes all Christians around the world all Christians that accept their form of Christianity and accept their laws that they are enforcing on the world at this time of great persecution. And that's the time that Yeshua referred to in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21, pointing us back to Daniel for greater detail on what he was talking about. And this is exactly what we're looking at. We're looking at the greater detail, not only to the kingdoms, but the exact identity to who is being involved in this great persecution worldwide. It goes on in verse 11 of Daniel chapter 8, he even exalts himself as high as the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice is taken away, and the place of his sanctuary cast down. The place of his sanctuary. Where's the place of God's sanctuary? And somebody might say, well, we're talking about the heavenly sanctuary. Well, we could be talking about the heavenly sanctuary, but the place of God's sanctuary where he said he would put his name forever, which is where the holy city, the heavenly Jerusalem, is going to come down and be there forever. That's the promise. Ultimately, it will be there forever. But the little horn is going to end up in Jerusalem in a sanctuary, taking control during the times of the Gentiles. So we see the direct connection here with Daniel chapter 8 and Daniel chapter 11. We see the events portrayed in Daniel chapter 8 that are expounded on in chapter 11 of Daniel. Let's move on in Daniel chapter 11 verse 43 to 45. He shall become ruler of the treasures of gold and of silver and all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Cushites shall follow in his train. But news from the east and from the north shall alarm him, and he shall go out with great fury to destroy and devote many to destruction. So this is what it's talking about, this power, this little horn power. These verses, because it uses these terms, Egypt, Libyans, and Cushites, a lot of times people have said, oh, this is all in the past, and it's not talking about anything that's happening in the future. But we see in prophecy things that are spoken of the time of the end, and the geographical fixes that are in these prophecies show the kingdoms that were back then. We saw this in Daniel 8 with the kings of Media and Persia, and the kingdom of Greece, which is actually the kingdom of Javan, which are the kingdoms of the West. We've seen that God uses ancient names to portray end time events. Why does he do this? To give us geographical fixes as to where these things will be played out. The epicenter, if you will, of these events. And this is exactly what we see here. But news from the east and from the north shall alarm him, and he shall go out with great fury to destroy and devote many to destruction. I just want to look at this east and north. We see in Daniel chapter 7, we see 4 kings. We see a lion with eagle's wings. We see a bear, and we see a leopard with 4 heads and 4 wings, and we see a dreadful beast that's made up of many kings. These are the kings that are portrayed in the time of the end that will ultimately join this little horn to persecute God's people. We see this again in Daniel chapter 8, as in the 4 horns that come out of the goat when the large horn is broken. We've covered that previously. Then we see these 4 horns that come out toward the 4 winds of heaven. And we see exactly the same thing in Daniel chapter 11. We see this notable king in the first few verses of chapter 11 that's broken. That parallels the notable horn from Daniel chapter 8 that's broken. It also parallels the eagle's wings that are broken off the lion. All the same power. And then we see a division in chapter 11, just as we see in Daniel chapter 7 in the 4 beasts and in the 4 horns of Daniel chapter 8. We see that division after the breaking of this mighty king that does according to his will, speaking of that notable horn from Daniel chapter 11 and the eagle from Daniel chapter 7. And it's divided, it says in Daniel 11, to the 4 winds of heaven. Same thing again, as Daniel chapter 7, Daniel chapter 8, Daniel chapter 11 now goes forward. Instead of listing 4 beasts or 4 horns, which are symbolic, it goes into the literal, and you get into the king of the north, the king of the south, and so on as we go through Daniel chapter 11. So they're literal, but they're mysterious because it doesn't name which kingdoms they are. And that's what's created confusion through history, because we don't have the United States named, we don't have China named, we don't have Great Britain or the European Union, but they're called these different directions of the compass, just as in the beasts are not named literal kingdoms, but we see here the same thing. God has had it mysterious because it's not until the time of the end, the time that we arrive, that we can start to put names on some of these players. And as we get deeper into these prophecies, as in real time, the mysteries that we see today in them will become very clear as we need the information. The concept of we are on a need-to-know basis holds true especially in prophetic things that God has kept hidden from times past for us, upon whom the end of the ages have come. So we see this east, news from the east. We see in Revelation that we see some kings from the east, and we see this king of the north. We see this king of the north in Daniel 11. We see a king of the south in Daniel 11. So we've got 3 directions of the compass portrayed in Daniel 11. I would propose that that's an indication that we're looking at the prophecies of Daniel 7 with the 4 beasts that are the 4 winds of heaven, and Daniel chapter 8, same thing with the 4 horns, which are divided toward the 4 winds of heaven. The same thing in the first few verses of Daniel 11. We see it's divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, and then it goes into the directions of the compass. So it's portrayed just a little differently, but I believe talking about exactly the same thing here. So a lot of people have thought in history that the king of the north is this power, is the papacy, but quite clearly I think it's the king of the north here that comes against this power that has put itself in Jerusalem. So they are going to make war. And we see this in Revelation 17, where we see the kings of the earth come against this Babylonian queen, this harlot, which I believe to be none other than the little horn of Daniel chapter 7 and Daniel chapter 8. So we see all these things coming together with great detail in these prophecies. And this is why we need to study them diligently to put all these pieces together. If we take them and isolate them, there's no way we're going to figure this thing out. We've got to look at all the prophecies that have to do with the events that we're looking at here right before us. Revelation 18:3 is a little more information on what this time frame is going to look like. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her, the harlot, fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury. This is exactly what it's talking about in Daniel chapter 11 of this little horn power. And I heard a voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, lest you share of her sins, and lest you receive of her plagues." I didn't put this in here, but you can look in Revelation chapter 13, Revelation chapter 14, all one dialogue. It's this last call, if you will, this judgment call. Revelation chapter 14, verse 6, talks about coming out of her, and because the judgment has come, and this call to come out of Babylon, do not forsake of her plagues. And then we see the 7 last plagues that are mentioned there. And it's all about people that remain faithful. Revelation chapter 14, verse 12, talks about people that endure, those that are obedient to God's commandments. And we see exactly the same thing that's going on in Daniel chapter 7, 8, and 10 through 12. But much more detail, and as we put this Revelation 13 together, we can see that the kings of the earth are going to unite with this little horn power, and they're going to persecute God's people. However, the whole thing's going to turn on this little horn power, this papal power, this harlot power, and they will destroy the harlot. And we see this. We saw this in Daniel chapter 7, verse 11. We see that this harlot, or this little horn power, is destroyed by fire. We get the information when we get into Revelation 17 that the kings of the earth will ultimately destroy her and burn her with fire. So let's move on in Daniel chapter 11. He shall pitch his palatial tents between the sea and the glorious holy mountain, yet he shall come to his end, and none will help. How is he going to come to his end? Well, it said that news from the east and from the north shall trouble him. These are the kingdoms of the world coming down on this papal power that has exalted itself above the stars of God, above Yeshua himself, created laws in this world that go against the laws of God, have persecuted God's people, and he will come to his end. And it says that in Revelation 17 that God has put it into the hearts of the kings of the earth to destroy this harlot. That's what we're looking at in Revelation 17. And the 10 horns, which you saw on the beast, this is this world system that's going to be created, this conservative Christian world order that will be made up of the kings of the earth. They will enforce their brand of Christianity on all those on the earth, and God's people will be warred against by these, and they will be it will be determined by these powers that God's people are destroyed and rid from the earth. A final cleansing of the earth of all that is of God. But it goes on to say that God has put it in the hearts of these 10 kings to destroy the harlot. They will hate the harlot. I believe at some point the harlot will be destroyed for the main reason that they will see that the harlot is just in it for herself. And they will come to understand that the harlot is, if you will, the Antichrist. The harlot is an Antichrist, but it is not the Antichrist. And this is what people in the past have made the mistake of determining that all those things in prophecy. One example is in 2 Thessalonians that he will sit as God in the temple of God, showing himself to be God. And they have applied this to the papacy in the past. That's what I was taught when I first came into some of these understandings. But then after some serious study, emphasis on the serious study, I found that actually those verses are not talking about the papacy, although the papacy is an application to those verses. It's not a fulfillment to those verses. The one that fulfills those verses, the one that claims to be God, sitting in the temple of God, that's a lie. It's not the temple of God. The claim is that he is God, and the claim is that he's sitting in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Well, we know the whole thing's a lie. It's not God's temple that's going to be built in Jerusalem. It's the temple that's been prepared for the Antichrist, and the Antichrist, the one that sets himself in opposition against Christ himself, is Satan himself. So Satan will take the seat after the little horn is destroyed. You see, the little horn power, the papal power, is going to be used by the devil to bring him to the forefront. The world will go against the papacy ultimately at the end, only, unbeknownst to them, to make way for the true Antichrist. They will be thinking that the papacy is the Antichrist, and they will destroy him and usher in the second coming, and lo and behold, the one that shows up after that is Satan himself. For God has put it into the hearts to fulfill his purpose. These are the kings of the earth now, to destroy the harlot, to be of one mind, and to give their kingdom to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. How has this all happened? Daniel 7 tells us, Daniel 8 tells us. Daniel 7 says, but the court shall be seated, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and destroy it forever. The little horn power is going to get a time, times and a half. That's what it talks about in Daniel chapter 7. Judgment will sit during the time of the little horn's reign, and God will declare enough is enough, and he will put it into the hearts of the kings of the earth. This is how God has worked in the past. He has used nations of the world to bring judgment upon other nations of the world. And he does not going to change the way he works. This is what's going to happen. He's going to inspire the kings of the earth to put judgment on this harlot. And Satan is all the time taking full advantage of what's going on. He knows what's going on, as we do, and he's going to take full advantage of these events. So this time frame that is talking about of the little horn is the 42-month time period, this 1,260 days, time times and a half. And we see the 1,260 days period and the time times and a half mentioned twice in Revelation chapter 11. Talks about the times of the Gentiles in Revelation 11. Doesn't use those terms, the times of the Gentiles. But it says that Jerusalem is going to be trampled underfoot until the times and a half, or the 1,260 days and the 42 months. So we see the exact more detail in Revelation chapter 11. We see the same time frame as 42 months in Revelation 13, and we see in Revelation 12 again as the 1,260 days and the times and a half, that this power makes war against God's people, the remnant God's people it talks about in Revelation chapter 12. And we know that these chapters have been applied historically as what I would say not a fulfillment, but an application. The people that have gone before have made the best best attempt that they could to understand these things. Can we learn some lessons from the past? Yes, we can. They had a lot of the details worked out, as in who the little horn is. That's a good example. We can use some of the information that those that have gone before us had, but we need to build on the foundation of prophecy that they were working on, and we can see how these things are coming to fruition even this day. Let's go back to Daniel chapter 12. At that time, it says, shall arise Michael, the great prince, who has charge of your people. And there shall be a time of trouble such as there never was since there was a nation to that time. But at that time your people shall be delivered, every one whose name shall be found in the book of life. And this is beautiful. This is how God does prophecy. He gives you the bad news, but then he gives you the good news. So at the time of trouble such as there never was, this is the time of trouble that Yeshua referred to in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21, time of trouble such as there never was since there was a nation. This is the time of trouble that he referred to when he said, go back to Daniel to get the greater information. I want to demonstrate something that's extremely important that we understand here. Daniel chapter 12, verse 1 and 2, a lot of times is isolated from its context. The context is Daniel chapter 11, back here, verse 45. He shall pitch his tents between the sea and the glorious holy mountain, yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help. And we saw the details of the book of Revelation shows us how he comes to his end. It's the kings of the earth. But it says right after that, that's what we don't want to miss. It's at the time of the destruction of the little horn that it says that Michael shall arise And at that time, when the little horn is destroyed, that's when there's this time of trouble, such as there not has been since there was a nation. As if it could get worse, one might think. This persecution of the little horn that lasts for times and a half, depending on where you live in the world, this persecution that all nations now are taking part of, the little horn is now destroyed, and that's when Daniel says that it's going to get worse. How much worse? A lot worse. It's never been as bad. How is that going to happen? Well, the good news is it's going to be shortly after that time of trouble, such there never was. It's a time frame of trouble, so it's going to last for a certain amount of time. But the good news is that it's going to be during that time of trouble, such as there never was, that God's people will be delivered. What is it talking about here? It's talking about the resurrection. It's talking about the time when Yeshua returns. So the precursor of Yeshua returning is the destruction of this little horn power, but what's going to follow that is going to be a time of trouble such as there never was. So we're trying to grapple with, well, what could possibly be worse? Well, this is what's worse, and it talks about it in Revelation chapter 12. It says that war broke out in heaven, and Michael and his angels, this is the same Michael that's referred to in Daniel chapter 12, his angels fought, and the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. And somebody might say, well, he's been cast out a long time ago. Well, I would tend to disagree with that, because he's going to have his day in court, and when that comes to an end, he will be cast out forever. There's no question about that. You see, he's the prosecuting attorney, if you will, when God holds his court, his heavenly court, in the time of the end, and when that's the court that we spoke about in Daniel chapter 7, that God spoke about, that the court will be set and judgment would be made, and Satan is going to have his time in that court. We see this also portrayed in Zechariah chapter 3, and that's quite clear that Satan is standing in that heavenly court. But there's going to be a time when he is cast out forever, no longer going to be able to show his face in that heavenly court, because he's going to be found guilty. Well, what happens? He is cast to the earth. It tells us exactly what's going to happen. So the great dragon was cast out, the serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives who? The whole world. And he was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. That doesn't sound that good, does it? No, it doesn't. And people say, oh, that was happened in the past. Well, I would tend to differ the way these prophecies are portrayed. Goes on in Revelation 12 to say, therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, because he knows he has a short time. This is the reality of the situation. He's going to be cast to the earth. Why is he going to be cast to the earth? Because everyone needs to make a decision who they're going to worship. Ultimately, are they going to worship Satan, or are they going to worship God? And this is what this whole process that has been developing over the ages that have been before us. And ultimately, Satan himself will show up as Christ. He will impersonate Christ, and he will come declaring himself that he is God, and that he has come to sit in his temple that has been built for what? The millennium ages that are before us. So he's going to come to a temple declaring himself to be God, sitting himself in a temple, which is what Christianity and even the Messianic movement is looking for, a time frame on this earth where Christ will reign. This is a perfectly orchestrated counterfeit system that the whole world is going to fall prostrate before this being that is clearly revealed in the prophecies that most people are not even aware of. That's why it's called the deception of the ages, if you will. Now, when the dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child, identifying who this body of believers is. And it goes on in Revelation 9, 1-3. Then the fifth angel sounded. I saw a star fallen from heaven to the earth. To him was given the key to the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and smoke arose out of the pit like the smoke of a great furnace. So the sun and the air were darkened because of the smoke of the pit. Then out of the smoke locusts came upon the earth, and to them was given power, as scorpions of the earth have power. Yeshua saw this in the gospel that's recorded, the Gospel of Luke. Says, and he said to them, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. When people read this, they think that Yeshua saw this as a historical event, but I believe, the way the prophecies are written, he saw this as a future event when Satan would fall like lightning, as recorded in the book of Revelation, that was not recorded as yet. So definitely, I think we can see from the book of Revelation that this event is clearly an event that is yet in history in front of us, and we're starting to see this clearly now, that Satan will be cast out of heaven forever, but he's come to the earth and he's given a key that unlocks all the demons and unleashes them on the earth. Now do we see why at the time that the little horn is destroyed, as we saw in Daniel chapter 11 and 12, that it's at that time that there's going to be a time of trouble unlike any other time of trouble. And we see more light on that when we get to the 7 last plagues. This is all part and parcel of the events that are going to be happening on the earth. This is the time of trouble that's unlike any other time of trouble. Now we can start to parallel this with the time of Egypt. When the then Pharaoh, there was a time of trouble in Egypt, such as there never was, and there were all these plagues in Egypt. Well, Pharaoh was a type of Satan, and we can parallel that time in Egypt with what this time that we're looking at in the future, when God's people will be protected from these 7 last plagues, when Satan will gain control of the world during this time. Behold, I give you authority to trample on serpents and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy, and nothing shall by any means hurt you. This is the good news part, is that God is not going to take us out of this world. He's going to give us the power to live through the events that are coming. And we have the promises of Yeshua to fall back on. I want to now go into some things that are written in Isaiah that have been confusing. They were confusing to me for a long time, and I'm not saying I have the whole thing figured out, but we have some prophecies that we have in the book of Isaiah that I believe pertain to the time that we're looking at here. Isaiah 14:29, it says, do not rejoice, all you of Philistia, because the rod that struck you is broken. So this is talking about an area in Palestine, the Middle East area. The rod who struck you is broken. For out of this serpent's roots will come forth a viper, and its offspring will be a fiery flying serpent. Well, who could this be? Is it possible that the rod that struck them was the little horn, and people will rejoice because now the little horn is broken? But it says here, do not rejoice, because out of the roots of this movement, out of the roots of this evil that was this persecuting power that the kings of the earth now are looking at as being destroyed, out of the roots of that plan will come this fiery flying serpent. It's like we're going from the frying pan right into the fire here with this fiery flying serpent. Who could this fiery flying serpent be other than Satan himself, the one that was in the Garden of Eden, that was tempting Eden, that was eating the fruit of the tree? This is who is coming. The burden against the beasts of the south, through a land of trouble and anguish, from which came the lioness and lion, the viper and fiery flying serpent. They will carry their riches on the backs of young donkeys, and their treasures on humps of camels, to a people who shall not profit. In other words, it's going to come to an end. It's telling us exactly what we read about in Daniel, that they will get even the treasures of the land, and all these things are contained in these prophecies. For the Egyptians shall help in vain, and to no purpose. Therefore I have called her Rahab Ham Shabbath. And what does that mean? Rahab was who? Rahab was a harlot, but in this sense, it's not so good. You want to look at what those words mean there. It's Rahab that does nothing. So instead of Rahab helping God's people, in this sense, Rahab is in the situation where she's not helping God's people. And that's what you would expect of a harlot, especially a harlot in the time of the end. It persecutes God's people. Now go, write it before them on a tablet, and note it on a scroll, that it may be for a time to come, forever and ever. That this is a rebellious people, lying children, children who will not hear the law of Jehovah. This is kind of connecting us back to Daniel chapter 7, Daniel chapter 8, Daniel chapter 10 through 12, and Revelation, when there's a war against God's people, those that hear the law of God in the time of the end, those that obey his commandments and have the testimony of Yeshua, who say to the seers, do not see, and to the prophets, do not prophesy to us right things. Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. What did they repent from? Their evil works, their war against God's people who keep his commandments. Speak to us smooth things, prophesy deceits. The prophets of old were warning God's people, God's own people, to obey his law. Go out of the way, turn aside from the path, cause the Holy One of Israel to cease from before us. And we see this also in Isaiah, when we need to turn back to the old paths, the way of God's people, the paths that we're supposed to be walking in, his ways. That's what we're supposed to do. Isaiah 14 goes on to say, how are you fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How are you cut down to the ground, you who weakened the nations? This is exactly the same picture that we see in the book of Revelation, where Satan is cast down to the ground, fallen, as it were, as a burning mountain to the earth. How's he cut down to the ground? You who weakened the nations. For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation on the farthest sides of the north. This is what's deemed as in Jerusalem. So he's going to sit, he declares himself, he tells all of us, God has revealed what he has said. He will sit on the mount of the congregation, the mount of the Moed. That would be a temple in Jerusalem on the farthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. He's going to be the counterfeit Yeshua that's going to come prior to Yeshua's coming. If Yeshua is going to come at a festival, which most people that are studying, even Christians, realize he'll probably show up at a festival. Most Christians, most people that I know, are looking at Yeshua returning in the fall. There needs to be a temple built in Jerusalem for the Messiah for when he comes, and he's going to come in the fall. Well, if you were going to be a counterfeit Messiah, you would have to show up prior to his coming. The prophecies seem to indicate, and we've got other presentations that show this quite clearly, that Yeshua will actually fall, his coming will fall in the spring, the time of deliverance, as we have seen in the Exodus of Egypt, that will portray, actually shows when our Messiah will come, and that will be in the spring, following the plagues, just as they fell in Egypt, so they will fall in the time of the end. So everyone's looking for a Messiah to come in the fall, to reign in Jerusalem for the millennium. He's got a perfectly orchestrated plan. The false Messiah has a perfectly orchestrated plan that the whole world will fall into view, and they will accept this false Messiah. That's why he's going to be accepted as the Messiah when he claims to be the Messiah that will come at this time in Jerusalem for the long-awaited for millennium, declaring himself that he is the return of the Messiah. But those that know these prophecies recognize that when Yeshua comes, he will raise the dead, and he will meet them in the air, as Paul talks about in 1 Thessalonians 4. He talks about the dead in Christ rising and meeting Yeshua in the air. This is what it's talking about in Daniel chapter 12. It'll be at that time, this time of trouble such as there never was, when Satan will reign. It will be during that time of great persecution, the time of trouble such as there never was, that God will deliver his people. And this is what it talks about. Paul talks about in 1 Thessalonians. And we will meet those that are alive and remain, will meet the Lord in the air, and they won't come back down to live out the millennium here. They will be ushered to God's throne. Talks about this in Revelation chapter 6 and 7, the same time frame. They will be taken to the throne room, and they will remain there with Yeshua and reign with him, it says, for 1,000 years. This is how these prophecies play out. Goes on to say in Isaiah chapter 15, you shall be brought down to Sheol, the grave, to the lowest depths of the pit. Those who see you will gaze at you and consider you, saying, is this the man or the being who made the earth tremble, who shook kingdoms, who made the whole world a wilderness and destroyed its cities, who did not open the house of his prisoners? All the kings of the nations, all of them sleep in glory, everyone in his own house. But you are cast out of your grave like an abominable branch, like the garment of those who are slain, thrust through with the sword, who go down to the stones of the pit, like a corpse trodden underfoot. You will not be joined with them in burial, because you have destroyed your land and slain your people. The brood of evildoers shall never be named. So this is a picture of Satan actually, if you will, in prison during the 1,000 years. Prepare slaughter for his children because of the iniquity of their fathers, lest they rise up and possess the land and fill the face of the world with cities. This is an interesting verse, I find, is that Satan's plan is to fill the earth with cities. And it's interesting when we see the cities, they're cities of evil. The cities of the world are filled with evil, and that's what Satan wants to do. That's why he brings them into the cities. That's why he tries to bring them into the cities where all the evil is. And God's message to his last day people is get out of the cities to where you will be safer. And as we see the day approaching, this message of getting out of the cities couldn't be possibly more important than it is now. What's developing in the cities of the world right now is going to be absolute chaos as we come closer and closer to these events portrayed in the book of Daniel and Revelation. Goes on in Daniel now, going back to Daniel 12 verses 3 and 4, after this time of trouble, this deliverance of God's people, and those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky above, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. I thank God that knowledge is now increasing, and we know what's coming prior to what's coming. We can't imagine how bad it's going to be, but God has said he's going to be with us through it all, and we will be preserved ultimately forever. Whether we die or whether we live through it, God is going to see us through. We're going to stop there, and then next week we're going to finish up on Daniel chapter 12, and that's the time frame, the timelines of all of this, and we're going to look at that. We're going to put all these time frames from both Daniel and Revelation, and we will jump back into Isaiah a little bit too, because he talks about these time frames, the events of these time frames, as we have seen today, not giving us the exact timing of those events portrayed in Isaiah, but the events themselves, and we can lift those out and put them into their proper place in time, in the time frames of what is recorded in both Daniel and Revelation. So with that, we'll close today. Let's have prayer, and look forward to meeting with you again here from Camp Tamid, and look deeper into these prophecies, looking at the time frames next week. Father in heaven, we thank you so much that you have given us a great deal of detail in these prophecies, that we can know exactly what's coming. And we can warn people, not only know for ourselves and for our families, but we can know for ourselves what's coming, so that we can share that, we can be wise and instruct many to turn many from the evil ways of the world. We pray you be with us now, and Father, we ask that you continue to work on our hearts. We give you full permission to change us to be the kind of people that you need to represent your kingdom, that will cause many to follow you. We pray this in Yeshua's name. Amen. Amen.